Welcome. We're diving today into one of the most talked about and timely books of the last decade. The Coddling of the American Mind: How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure. Written by First Amendment lawyer Greg Lukianoff and social psychologist Jonathan Haidt, this book quickly became a New York Times bestseller, and was praised for its wise and scrupulous, and disturbing and comprehensive analysis of recent campus trends. The central premise is jarring. Starting around 2013, a convergence of cultural and political forces led to the rapid spread of a concept the authors call safetyism. This safetyism, an obsession with eliminating threats both real and imagined, began treating young students like candles, which can be extinguished by a puff of wind, when the goal of education should be to turn them into fires, which thrive on the wind. Lukianoff and Haidt noticed an unprecedented pattern emerging on college campuses: students demanding not just physical safety, but emotional safety. This culture, driven by otherwise good intentions, is inadvertently making a generation less resilient, more prone to undesirable emotional reasoning, less capable of engaging critically with others' viewpoints, and more likely to cultivate an us versus them mentality. They note that if these ideas are embraced, the consequences for society and democracy are dire. The authors structure their critique around what they call the three great untruths, ideas that contradict both ancient wisdom and modern psychology. On human flourishing, the first untruth is arguably the most fundamental psychological error of our time: the untruth of fragility. What doesn't kill you makes you weaker. This idea assumes that students are fragile like a china teacup. The authors argue the opposite is true. Humans are designed to be anti-fragile, meaning we actually gain from disorder. We grow stronger and benefit when exposed to challenges, risks, and small doses of stress, including intellectual discomfort. Systems that are anti-fragile become rigid, weak, and inefficient when nothing challenges them. The absurdity of this approach is captured by folk wisdom: prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child. This concept runs counter to practices like the expansive use of trigger warnings for texts, and the creation of highly protected safe spaces sometimes furnished with cookies, coloring books, bubbles, and videos of frolicking puppies to shield students from ideas that cause distress. This is misguided. The authors point out that avoiding triggers is actually a symptom of trauma, not a treatment. Cognitive behavioral therapies (CBT) involve gradual, systematic exposure to traumatic memories until their capacity to trigger distress diminishes. Lukianoff and Haidt urge readers to push back hard against the cultivation of fragility and victimhood. The second untruth is deeply psychological: the untruth of emotional reasoning. Always trust your feelings. This runs contrary to the foundation of modern mental health practice, particularly cognitive behavioral therapy (CBT), which Lukianoff used in treating his own depression. CBT is built on the opposite principle that feelings often mislead us, and we must learn to question our automatic thoughts and cognitive distortions. The book highlights how this flawed reasoning is weaponized, especially on campus. If a speaker makes you feel uncomfortable, anger, or upset, then that emotion is seen as sufficient evidence to justify banning or silencing them due to the danger they supposedly pose. Common cognitive distortions noted in campus events include catastrophizing, focusing on the worst possible outcome as most likely, arguing that a conservative speaker will cause broken bodies or deny people the right to exist, labeling, attaching extreme, generalized labels to people without evidence, calling a colleague a white supremacist. This leads directly to the third untruth: the untruth of us versus them. Life is a battle between good people and evil people. The human mind is prepared for tribalism. When this untruth is embraced, it amplifies a mindset that sees disagreements not as intellectual debates, but as moral battles. This is known as pathological dualism, where humanity is divided into the unimpeachably good and the irredeemably bad. This fuels call-out culture, where students gain prestige for publicly shaming those who commit small offenses. This public shaming and fear of social retribution forces students into walking on eggshells, inhibiting the free exchange of ideas vital to a university. This was seen at Claremont McKenna College (CMC), where Dean Mary Spellman was forced to resign after using the word mold in an email, because students interpreted it in the least generous way possible. The shift towards safetyism was not accidental. It was driven by several complex and interacting threads. Lukianoff and Haidt persuasively unpack these trends, linking the campus predicament to wider parenting, cultural, and political issues. One factor is rising political polarization. Americans suffer from immense cross-party animosity. Social media facilitates a polarization cycle, where campus outrages are amplified by media, leading to counter-outrages. Another key thread is the crisis in adolescent mental health. Rates of anxiety and depression among adolescents, born 1995 onwards, have risen sharply since around 2011. The book argues that this generation arrived on campus more receptive to protective policies, although exposure to untruths risks making them more fragile, anxious, and prone to seeing themselves as victims. This crisis is linked to paranoid parenting, overprotective, fear-driven parenting common among the middle and upper classes. Parents teach children to fear the world, and rely on adults to solve their problems. This practice violates the folk wisdom: prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child. This overprotection leads to the decline of play. Children are deprived of unsupervised free play, the time necessary for them to wire their brains for social and physical competence, independence, and resilience. Instead, childhood is marked by the resume arms race, focusing on structured activities designed to get them into competitive colleges. A fifth thread is the growth of bureaucracy. Universities have expanded staff to handle student complaints, treating students like customers. They adopted codes and standards often driven by fear of lawsuits or bad publicity that model the great untruths, such as equating offensive speech with punishable harassment, or creating restrictive free speech zones. Finally, there is the quest for justice. Students are passionately motivated by social justice activism. However, when this commitment focuses solely on equal outcomes rather than on proportional procedural justice, activists often interpret deviations from group norms as evidence of malicious systemic bias, leading to counterproductive campaigns, even against people who share their goals. The goal of the book is ultimately hopeful. The problems described are fixable. The solution requires intentionally working against the three great untruths, and raising wiser kids and building wiser universities. For children and parents, the advice is clear. Overprotection makes children weaker. Children should be encouraged to take small risks, allowed unsupervised free play, and taught intellectual skills. Parents should teach children the basics of CBT, techniques how to examine exaggerated thoughts and identify cognitive distortions. For universities, the core message is that education should not be intended to make people comfortable. It is meant to make them think. Universities must protect freedom of inquiry and debate as their central mission. Lukianoff and Haidt propose that universities formally adopt the Chicago Statement on Principles of Free Expression to guarantee students the broadest latitude to speak, challenge, and learn. They must explicitly reject the untruths, encourage viewpoint diversity, and refuse to allow the heckler's veto that shuts down speakers, as activist Van Jones summarized in advice, endorsed by the authors. I don't want you to be safe ideologically. I don't want you to be safe emotionally. I want you to be strong. That's different. I'm not going to pave the jungle for you. Put on some boots, and learn how to deal with adversity. I'm not going to take all the weights out of the gym. That's the whole point of the gym. This is the gym. The book's message is an urgent one. The path toward progress and a more sane society lies not in cultivating emotional fragility, but in embracing the challenges and intellectual rigor that allow us all to become stronger, wiser, and better prepared for the complex world. Thanks for joining us today. See you in the next video.